Next, we go to Chapter 4, Key Global Environmental Conventions. For the learning outcomes, students will understand the United Nations Conventions for the Climate Change UNFCCC. Students briefly review the International Conventions for Human Security and Multilateral Environmental Agreements MEA. United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change UNFCCC entrance onto force on 20 March 1994. Today, UNFCCC have 197 members. For UNFCCC, actually they focus on protections of the ozone layers and the conventions. UNFCCC also have an effort action for protect our layer ozone and also to reduce carbons. That's why for the UNFCCC, they are also collaborate with the United Nations. They are also focus on the carbon trade and any greenhouse gases issues, chlorofluorocarbon issues, and so on. Next, we go to the Paris Agreements. Paris Agreements, actually, they are also focused on the climate change issues. On December 2015, they are also have 196 parties at COP21 in Paris. For the Paris Agreements, they also focus on the limit global warming to get below 2 degrees Celsius. As we know, kenaikan suhu tahunan ni every year, kenaikan suhu tahunan meningkat. So they want to get below 2. So at least 1.5 kenaikan or below, itu lebih baik, or maintain. Actually it's long term process for Paris Agreement. We cannot get immediately. So they have their own programs to reduce carbon, let's say for the greenhouse gases, zero carbon. That's why they are come up with the idea for the carbon training programs. And so they can at least to reduce ni lah kenaikan suhu tahunan. Alright, so how does the Paris Agreement works? As we know, for the Paris Agreements, they work every 5 year. They have their conference. Dia ada buat perjumpaan lah among dia punya parties. So every 5 year they have their own plan for 5 years next. What to do, what the program they want to focus. Now they'll maybe focus on the program under sustainable development, or we call it as SDG, ESG, and one of the method that they use to reduce global warming issues. All right, next we go to the international conventions for human securities. For international convention for human securities, actually they focus on the issues inilah sempadan kan, isu-isu sempadan like the issue from Thailand and Malaysia, Indonesia and Malaysia, which is they have like the Sabah areas, they have a lot of apa ni orang kata pirate issues, right? Isu-isu London isu London kat Sabah ni very critical because they're very extreme, so that for the they focus on the safety issues or securities issue for the countries. They relates on the issue militant. Alright, next we go to the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from the Ships, or MARPOL 1973. For the MARPOLs, actually they are focused on the preventions of pollution of the sea by oil. As we know lah, kapal-kapal ni dia banyak keluarkan minyak, tumpah minyak and so on. Alright, oil and gas industry and so on lah. So there will impacts on the marine ecosystem. So they want to protect for the marine ecosystem. All right, next we go to the multilateral environmental agreements or MEAs. For MEAs, they are actually agreements between the three or more states that assist with the addressing specific environmental problems at national, regional, and global levels. As a MEA, actually they are focused on the specific environmental issues, like maybe they want to doing any regulations, any guidelines, or environmental protections, to make any issues lah, any issue related on the environments, so they want to create any multilateral environmental agreement. So it can be amongst state, amongst countries, regionals or global levels. So the examples of the prominent multilateral environmental agreements MEAs includes like a Paris agreements, which is under Paris agreement they have involved more than three countries, in Paris agreements. They agree to sign and commit for reduce carbons and also to solve the climate change issues. Also, they released on the United Nations Framework Conventions on the Climate Change or UNFCCC. And then for conventions on biological diversity, they also have more than three participants. They are signed and agree to protect biological diversities. And then we have a Montreal Protocol. It's like to Paris agreements. They also focus on the climate change issues, which is their they agree to reduce the ozone layers issues, especially to any country at least to reduce or tak guna langsung ke itu the best way for the chlorofluorocarbons lah, CFC. That's why nowadays banyak lah produk-produk dah tak guna dah CFC ni, for the aircons or fridge and so on lah. All right, next we go to the challenges of MEAs. To actually, what are the challenges for the MEAs? Kita janganlah seronok sign je every time offer sign for any conventions, semua Malaysia sign. However, we need to sign with effort. So kenalah ada effort. We doing a lot of related program. Let's say for the Paris agreements. So we have an effort to do a lot of program related to reduce climate change issues. Right, for the zero carbon programs, green campus, green city, and so on. So the challenges is how to compliance and enforcement. We have a lots of mechanism. Every country they have a lots of a mechanism focus on the enforcement. However, how to implement, their regulations, their programs, and so on. Maybe we have a um, very limitations according to financials, or maybe ada campur tangan politik and so on. Alright, and then of course they relates to how to monitor the program, how to consistent we doing for the zero carbon. So how we our program to consistent zero carbons. Then different national interests. Very orang kata very difficult. Every country they have their own interest. Some of the country they just focus on the biological protection. Some of the country they just focus on the marine issues. And then maybe some of the country they have very strict in terms of environmental regulations. So different country is very different dia punya implementations, how to standardize. So actually kita looking for their outcomes. They have a lots of methods to do environmental programs, and so how dia punya outcomes lah. And kita akan tengok outcomes dia saja. Alright, and then we go to the institutional complexities. Of course they have lots of institutions or stakeholders. Every stakeholders they have their own goals. So how to manage, how to make sure they have their own roles. It's not overlap each others lah. Janganlah asyik buat benda yang sama. So that they have their own rules. NGO they have their own rules. State or federals they have their own rules. So very complexity to do for the institutionals, for the environmental programs. Some of the stakeholders they have their own goals, and then some of the dia tak ada integrates lah amongst each others. So so maybe akan ada overlap programs. So or a state dah buat, federal dah buat. So how so we need to have a integrated programs. Then scientific and certainty. For the environmental issue, they have offered the complex implementations and involvement by MEA. So maybe they have very struggles lah for any implementation process for any program related on the environments. Then maybe they have challenges on the very limited resource. Maybe some of the country they have very limited sources in terms of nature sources, or maybe they have very limited sources in terms of financials. So every time kita nak buat program, we need to have a financials, a good financials. We need to spend money for any programs. So very limited sources also. So sometimes diorang nak buat programs, however, they have apa ni lah peruntukan from our governments, for example, kan.